Keela and I were having a conversation about some of the barriers to Black unity. And one of the things that I ended up kind of going into was this idea of Blackness as a monolith. Like there's only one real way to be Black. There's only one way to look Black. You need to have Black features be of a certain skin tone. You need to have a beard.
You need to be straight, right?
You need to be straight.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So
you can't, right. In terms of sexuality is what we're talking about.
Yeah. And that was, it kind of kicked off this conversation that I don't think a lot of us have. I think a lot of us kind of figure that everybody knows what it means to be Black and everybody can agree on what it means to be Black. But more and more I'm seeing like that's a real issue, that for some reason we think in order for us to all move together towards unity, we all need to have the same mindset. We need to come at problems in the same way. And I disagree.
Totally. That's one of the reasons why we're talking about this in this particular episode with Scott Speed is because I think it's an opportunity. Y'all hear me talk all the time about us not having language and practice around this work of liberation. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is to be able to dialogue with each other and be okay with the differences. So this guest, as you'll hear, Scott doesn't identify as Black. He is an African-American man born and raised in West Philly. And he doesn't use the term Black. He says, you'll hear him say, I say to my son all the time, I've never seen a white person. That color doesn't exist. These are basically results of white supremacy. And if you use that and identify as that, then you're perpetuating and subscribing to white supremacy. Now, Chris and I have a very different perspective on that. And Scott and I talked about that. I have a different understanding of it. But the point is that Scott and I have an agreement. Mm-hmm. We're on the same page about dismantling completely K through 12 education, the idea of education and how that affects children, period. But he and I can work together on that without needing to come from the same place in terms of our personal identity.
Right. Because you have a common goal.
Right.
And in essence, that's to me what unity is. There's a common goal. We don't have to be the exact same person. We don't even need to look the same. We don't even need to talk the same. It makes me think of this whole idea of being your authentic self and being who you are. For instance, most people that hear me talk and when we talk, they would say, I would never know that you're a Jamaican man. Mm-hmm. I would never know because you don't sound Jamaican.
Right.
I was like,
or you don't look Jamaican. You're supposed to have on like one of those marina with all the holes and the black, green and gold thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I can get that. I get it's easier to identify someone by how they sound. If they sound like a particular group or they look like a particular clan or whatever. I get it. But it works away from the process of unity.
Right.
So if someone sounded Jamaican or they look Jamaican to you, they go to Jamaica and they go and they stay in a resort owned by white people that don't live in Jamaica, that have nothing to do with Jamaica. And me, as someone that doesn't sound Jamaican, maybe doesn't look Jamaican, but when I go there, I support people on the road. I buy my products off the street from people in Jamaica. I don't buy my products from the supermarket.
Right.
Which one of us is doing more for Jamaica?
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying? Like which one is actually moving forward the idea of helping people in Jamaica and not people benefiting from Jamaica.
Right. And we extend that example now to Africa, right? Because we are in South Africa and it's our first time on the continent. And we were having a great conversation with a woman who is South African. She's actually from Lesotho, right? Mm-hmm. But grew up in South Africa. And we were talking about this idea of finding Black and brown owned businesses to support, right? And a future guest is going to talk about, she lives in Namibia and she puts out, her name is Kayla and it's African American in Africa is her blog. And I'm just so grateful she's doing that work because she post things about Black owned businesses to support, right? Because you can be on the continent and still completely only be supporting the descendants of the colonizers because that's easier to find. Mm-hmm. And then it goes into identity, as we said at the beginning, that Black or brown or whatever needs to look a certain way or to be a certain way. You know, you have these bullies like Umar Johnson.
Yeah.
That's his name.
Yeah.
Sure, there's a lot of things that he talks about in terms of Blackness and unity and white supremacy that make sense. But then there's also this very divisive, very separatist way that says that one person or one set of people are going to define blackness. And if you're not doing it that way, you're not black. Right. But then I go back to people like James Baldwin, who was an openly gay, not highly educated black man. Mm-hmm. So is he not black because he's gay? Or Prince or Grace Jones, you know, who had this beautiful androgyny thing going on. Yeah. These are just some examples. Of course, it runs the gamut, but
and they're blind spots. Some of these are blind spots because it's one of those things too that it kind of throws me off because there's like a lack of principle when you talk about these type of things. When somebody is doing well and popular and bringing notoriety and money towards something, all of a sudden they get a pass. They're okay. So maybe not a Baldwin because Baldwin was so outspoken and he said some things that, to be honest, some of these quote unquote black leaders that are out there now are afraid to say in front of white people. Word. They say it in their little communities and on their blogs and whatever, but put them in front of a stage of a bunch of white people. I doubt they'd say some of the things. Yeah. The point is that there's room for everybody.
Right.
There's room for all voices in this black unity and any kind of unity, actually.
And no one person gets to define it, right?
No one can define it.
But people try.
They can.
And they push. Yeah. So when we talk
that's
about
true.
Transgender, when we talk about non-binary in terms of even children who are not identifying as one particular thing, right? Mm-hmm. Because of course, this work comes right back to like the fear and the cost of raising a free child, of raising free people. Mm-hmm. To say, I need my child to be like this for these reasons, or my child isn't being respectful or isn't being whatever because they don't fit into these boxes in my head. For me, there's a direct parallel between raising free people and being a free person and recognizing that I don't need Scott to identify the same way as I do for us to work together or for me to respect the movements that he has going on. Right. And likewise, I don't need Scott to validate my idea of blackness because we're not debating to come to this one truth. Everybody comes to the table with a truth that makes sense for them, and you don't need to validate or define it. I think that's a very schooled mindset anyway, that the validation needs to be this, everybody understands this same thing, this oneness for it to be, valid and for us to be able to move forward with it. Yeah,
it's a very binary concept. Like you're either this or you're that.
Right, the monolith as you say.
Right. There are evolutionary reasons why that kind of stuff makes sense. If you're out in the wild, you need to identify something quickly as being dangerous or not. Mm-hmm. There's no really in between. But if we're doing things that require analytics and contemplation and forecasting, we can't be held to binary standards. It doesn't make any sense.
Nope. You're kind of, if we're trying to move forward.
No, because you're setting yourself up to alienate potential help and include people that don't really have your best interests at heart, right, simply because they, on the surface, seem like they're not dangerous. You understand? And I think that's actually, if you look at it, that's been a downfall of a lot of really good movement, that whole binary, including people that didn't have your best interests at heart because they looked a certain way or they seemed like you, and alienating people that actually would do more benefit to the organization or whatever movement you
believe in them sexual whatever. Yes.
Right. In the end, I think it's about the results. It's about the goal. If your goal is this, bring to the table what you think your goals are and let's work it out. Does it work does what you're bringing to the table work for what we have now? Yes or no? If not, make the adjustment. But I think we get caught up so much in how things need to look and how they need to present. It's very much like a TV, Instagram world in that case where you need that snapshot. You need to, on its surface, look a certain way.
Yes.
And it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing anything or moving in any progressive way. It just means you look like you are. Mm. And that's dangerous. I think that's very dangerous.
This has been a critical thinking public service announcement by two people who just talk and think about this stuff a lot. And it's very much inspired by our own work in attempting to raise free people and to continue to liberate ourselves.
Fear of the Free Child is a weekly podcast that centers
diverse narratives, insightful commentary,
learning with our children and deschooling ourselves, owning our multiple identities, and treating children with dignity,
creating community and sharing conversation from often silenced spaces,
breathing life into liberation practices, proactively and on purpose.
It's about parenting. It's about self-directed education, loving. It's about learning, liberatory practices.
Defining love for ourselves and giving our love to as much of the world as it can possibly contain.
Let's find each other. Let's support each other. All of these stories are important and should be shared. If this episode had a theme, maybe it does, it would be disruption. So I'm very particular about choosing that word, and it's coming up a lot for me in my work around raising free people and, continuing to recognize the ways that I'm participating in my own oppression and in the oppression of children. You'll hear me say disrupt or disruption a lot, I think, in this episode. And also my guest today, Scott Speed, would agree with the term, particularly for education, because he describes himself as an edupreneur who is set on disrupting K through 12 education, meaning that in its current form, it is not working and that he is setting out to do something about it. So I want you to, as you listen in, this is a long episode today, and it is so good and juicy. I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to talk to Scott. And as you heard, Chris and I had some really good conversation that stemmed from some of the things that Scott and I discuss in this episode. So the show notes page for today's episode is akilasrichards.com/Scott, SCOTT. I invite you to check out the resources that are listed there. And as usual, I would love for you to check out patreon.com/Akila to see how you can support the show, because we plan to do a lot more of these types of interviews and add some more sort of critical thinking segments to the mix. All right, let's get it. Akila S. Richards here. And as usual, I have a super interesting guest. This time it is Scott Speed, Dr. Scott Speed, the Edupreneur. He is a believer in disrupting K through 12 education in its current form. So he had me there. He's also an advocate of systems thinking, a father, a husband, an organizer, a thinker, a lifelong learner, all these wonderful things. He's also an educator from a long line of educators and the founder of the Neighborhood Enrichment Project, which is a Georgia-based 501c3 nonprofit. Scott Speed, thank you so much for being here on the podcast with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. So I kind of gave the checklist things of who you are and kind of what you be about, like the general thing. Can you give us in your own words, especially in terms of currently, kind of where you are in your journey right now?
Sure. As you stated in the opening, I consider myself an edupreneur because I am an entrepreneur and educator. Literally, I have straddled the fence in both worlds my entire life, but especially my entire adult life. And currently, I would say I walked away from public school education in 2012, and at that time, I began to, and literally walked away cold turkey because I no longer wanted to be a part of the problem. That's how I put it to my wife. I said, I can no longer be a part of the problem. So I walked away and I figured out my life after that. And what ensued was that I began to, right in that moment, literally in 2012, I woke up in the middle of the night and I started putting on paper my vision for education, my vision for how I would like to disrupt education. And it was something I had been playing around with in my mind and sharing ideas with people over, the course of a few years. While I was teaching in school and then going through my doctorate degree, I started getting exposed to alternatives to traditional education. And, once I was exposed to, the world of democratic education and, free schools and Montessori and Waldorf and unschooling, once I was exposed to that world, I took a deep dive and I just literally just started researching and reading and learning as much as I could over the course of a few years. And my vision that I initially wrote down, it began to change slowly but surely. And then more recently, I would say having to navigate life and pay bills. I didn't pick it up and take it into full throttle until about a year and a half ago. I decided that, I need to further this vision. It's kind of been sitting on paper and I need to further it. And I partnered up with a young lady who's like-minded, and she and I began to become a little bit more organized around this concept. And then she and I would meet periodically. And then about in this past fall of 2016, we enrolled in the ARROW, Alternative Education Resource Organization. They have a school starter program, and they've helped several alternative, models of schools start throughout the world.
Yeah.
And we signed up for that program, and we began taking that course, and that allowed us to further refine the vision, further grapple with, some of the decisions that need to be made, what we wanted to be, what we wanted to look like, etc. What we were non-negotiable about, what we were willing to bend on. And it was a very worthwhile experience. And it took us up to literally probably about 3-4 weeks ago when the course ended. And, that's kind of where we are now. And I feel like, we have something that is packaged in a well thought through plan, and it's just ready for implementation. So, in terms of implementation, it's going to be something that, is going to evolve organically and, incrementally, going forward.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that you talk about the fact that the vision that you had when you walked away, that it's changing, it's evolving, and it should, right? Because as you step outside of your own mind with it and start to be exposed to the spaces that you want to make a change in, information and, around how other people have been working through it, things that do work and don't work, then it makes sense for that thing to change. So I'm always encouraged when people say that they are open to the shift. And even though they have a clear idea, they are also clear that that idea needs to continue to evolve to match something outside of what's happening just in our own minds, as well developed as that might be. So I want to back up a little bit, Scott, because you said you walked away in 2012. You walked away from public education because you no longer wanted to be a part of the problem. What problem?
Oh, my goodness. I guess in 2012, the way the problem looked at that time was that the whole systemized, standardized, one size fits all teaching to the test world of education, it was horrible, and it hurt kids. And I could clearly see that it hurt kids, and also it hurt teachers as well, even though most of them may not realize it. And they're kind of, they're in there doing the best they can and kind of, are playing, most of them who endure, because it's still a high attrition rate, especially in public education.
Yeah.
But for those who've chosen to endure over the years, they kind of, they kind of, rally around the idea that they're helping children. Even in the most minute way, they're helping children, and also, that's what their career field is in, and it's not easy for everyone to walk away, and I'm sympathetic to that.
Exactly.
But for me, I just saw it as, we're hurting these kids. Like, I literally felt like, we were hurting those kids. I saw recess erode. I saw recess go away. It got to the point where I literally would get in trouble. We would have to sneak to take our kids outside to play.
Yes. See, okay. So you were a teacher. I'm going to make that clear, because we didn't say specifically. Okay. So what grade or grades were you teaching? Grade levels?
So I taught for 5 years. Okay. So I taught, pre-K, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. Each year I had a different grade.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And I love that you brought up, Scott, because these are some of the things that I enjoy as I was listening to a few of your podcast episodes as well. And I want to make sure people can experience you in different spaces. I think that's important. But, tying in all of these macro issues, because it isn't just about a person in a school system as far as a teacher. Capitalism is a factor. There are all of these things as to why we may not be able to, as educators, be able to step outside of the system, right? Because there's some of us, Absolutely. It's like a personal commitment, like, oh, kids are still going to need to be in it, so we got to be in here and kind of sneak and do what we can. Then there are others that are like, I can't, because I need my paycheck, I need my insurance, I need all of these different things. And it's interesting because so many of the people that I know coming from the unschooling space, so many of the unschooling parents and advocates that I know are former teachers or principals, so They come from the system and realize, just like you did, and just like even people like John Taylor Gatto, who was, New York Teacher of the Year and all of that, stepped away because they realized that it was problematic inherently. And even being inside of it and sneaking and doing the things that teachers like you were doing, it just wasn't enough. It wasn't enough.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not enough because it's a systems design problem.
Right.
You know, I tell people all the time, you know, I get frustrated when I hear people saying, you know, there's bad schools and good schools, or there's, you know, your schools are failing because the teachers are bad. I get so frustrated, you know, when I hear that stuff because again, it's a systems problem. You can show me the best, quote unquote, supposedly best school, which most people listening probably know that that's typically a school and a public school in an affluent area.
Yeah.
Those are considered the best schools. But if you ask someone like me, that school is not a good school, even though it's in a good, quote unquote, good area, which I don't believe in any of that nonsense, any of those paradigms and social constructs. But those schools aren't a good school. There's no such thing as a good public school when you understand systems, and just the inherent design of it is just all flawed and it's just all bad.
Right. And that's the problem. And we are afraid to say that and to face that because we feel like then it means that there's no hope or there's no other choice, which is why I love that a big part of what you do as an advocate for disrupting education in its current form, or even how we define education and learning, is that you're always telling us about alternatives. You're always sharing with us people who are doing different things already, not just concepting different things, but actually doing them. You know, I love that. And that's why I encourage all of us listening to really check out, and that'll be on the show notes page. And we'll talk probably a little bit about that here too, that you really have to step outside of where you are, you know, geographically, and also just even your mental bandwidth to see what else is happening, because you will feel like there's no other solution. You will feel like if you can just go to the school for a couple of more hours a day, that you could fix some shit that's not fixable, because it's a systems issue. So Scott, when you talk about the systems issue, I'd love to, and maybe I'm cutting you off from what you said, what you were talking about before. So if I am, please continue there. But I do want to make sure too that we touch on systems thinking, because I think that's going to really help us to put all of this stuff in context as well.
Sure. It's funny. I was just thinking about, and I'm going to bring up a quote about systems that I love to share with people. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that's interesting is I was speaking with the educator. She's a counselor a couple of days ago. And, you know, she was literally just coming from school and talking about the battles that she was fighting that day. And, you know, I can just feel the weight of everything that she was sharing. And I started sharing with her, you know, about some alternatives and, you know, this, I'm sorry, you know, it was actually, she also then went into the whole idea about being fearful of public schools being deteriorated because of the new voucher system that's supposed to be implemented. And, you know, I just told her that I just shared a different perspective. I said, you know what? I think the best thing that can happen is for the government to get out of education. Now, I don't want to, you know, act like I know what I'm talking about on that topic, because I truly don't pay attention to politics and to what's going on. I choose not to put my energy there.
Same
because,
here.
I don't personally like putting my energy into things that are divisive.
Yep.
So I have heard about the quote unquote vouchers, but in my mind, again, without doing any research, I believe there will probably be strings attached, and I believe that there'll probably still be, you know, standards and all those various things.
History tells us that, Scott. We don't have to be deeply political, because I share that sentiment with you overall. And people are like, well, how could you not? Because that's not where I choose to focus my energy. And I want to be about, you know, for having an impact. And that's not where I can do it. So I hear you on that. But history tells us at a very basic level that if they're going to be involved in that way, then of course they're going to be strings attached.
Absolutely. And I told her, I said, you know what? I said, the best thing that can happen, you know, because she went into the whole idea that, you know, especially it's going to hurt, you know, us, quote unquote, us African, African people, in America. And, you know, she went into that whole thing. And I said, you know, actually, I think that's the best thing that could happen. I said, because then it will allow people, educational innovators in our communities to step up and create and build, and loving caretakers in our communities that, you know, were designed to love and care on, you know, love on people and care for people.
Yes.
It allowed them to step up in a way that they've never had an opportunity to step up, you know, before, and create learning spaces that are designed to meet the individual needs. And, you know, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but,
but we need to hear it, Scott. We don't hear it enough.
Okay. Well, designed to address the specific individual needs of the individual first, and then that local community.
Yes.
And, you know, that's for me would be the best thing ever. You know, so that kind of rocked her boat, you know, to think that, for me to say all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Because again, it's hard for us to imagine something outside of that. The focus tends to be on, even for those of us who are embracing self-directed education in various forms, it can still be a very difficult shift to imagine what it would look like outside of that, because we still are having, I know I still constantly have the conversation with folks who are embracing aspects of self-directed education who still see it as a luxury that most of us won't be able to afford, as opposed to looking at the communities that are already in place. And as you said, the design of folks who are already just kind of, the way that they're designed and set up is to love on folks, is to create and nurture community spaces, is to focus on the individual and the community. We don't have a lot of ideas of what that might look like now. And so when you say those sort of things to folks, it's like, well, that's good for these kind of people, or that'd be good when I'm at this sort of space, which is understandable. This is not a judgment on that or a knock on that. It's understandable, but that's why it's important that you are stepping outside of the problem and looking at the ways that different people are solving it, so that you can, just sort of get you stirred up in looking in a different direction. Because if you do not, then you're really going to think that the issue is the teachers, or how much time you can't spend at the school, or if your child could just get their shit together. All of these things that are really not true. Yeah.
Yep. You know what? You're absolutely right. And I'm constantly, first of all, I appreciate you saying that it's not judgmental, because it absolutely isn't, because I am very empathetic to the fact that we all, are indoctrinated.
Yes.
And some of us reach a position of unlearning, sooner than others. And, I'm not that person that's going to, like, when I learn something, all of a sudden expect everyone, like, why don't you know it? And kind of bring that attitude of, I've known this the whole time. I've grown to know and learn the things that I know, and the things I believe, and the things that I've adopted into my, my world beliefs and perspectives.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely with you in that. I don't judge anyone, but also I take pride in and kind of being that voice to, like you said, expose people, to these various avenues. I'm constantly having battles. I encounter family members and friends when I have these conversations with them. I get a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, it's because it's so far out of their worldview and their indoctrination and the way we all have kind of been designed. And if they haven't taken the time to unlearn it, then they're going to, this stuff is going to sound odd. But with that being said, I just keep coming. I just continue to, live it. Yeah, live it and share, and just, hope that, I can make a difference little by little. But I wanted to get into the system stuff. Can I share a systems quote?
For sure.
By Donella Meadows, and it's in a book called Thinking in Systems, a very, very academic book. And for those people who don't enjoy academic reading, I wouldn't suggest starting with that book, but I did want to give, but I will give another resource. So the quote is this: hunger, poverty, environmental degradation, economic instability, unemployment, chronic disease, drug addiction, and war, for example, persist in spite of the analytical ability and technical brilliance that have been directed toward eradicating them. No one deliberately creates those problems. No one wants them to persist, but they persist nonetheless. That is because they are intrinsically systems problems, undesirable behaviors characteristic of the system structures that produce them. They will yield only as we reclaim our intuition, stop casting blame, see the system as the source of its own problems, and find the courage and wisdom to restructure it. That says so much. The part that I love is reclaim our intuition.
I just wrote that down. Literally, I just wrote that down. Reclaiming our intuition.
Absolutely. Because a lot of people, they feel what you and I feel, right?
Yes.
They know something isn't right.
Yes.
But it's like, it's that fear to accept your intuition as real, and to actually, go in a direction that it's telling you to go, because there's no path that's already laid out in a lot of instances in that direction. And sometimes you may feel like an outsider, and a lot of people don't like feeling that way.
Exactly.
So they continue to kind of go along instead of just embracing and reclaiming their intuition. and seeking out like-minded people. And that's how I found you.
Exactly, which is so wonderful. We definitely have to share that story as well. And I love that you brought up intuition. That's been an integral part of my work even before I started publicly sharing, our journey towards unschooling, and then really recognizing that that's a much bigger thing. It really is not just about learning or education, but about a mindset and really just a way of living and what all of those things are tied to. Because when we back up a little bit, from this space of like reclaiming intuition and systems thinking and all of that, it's like, what is intuition? Because from the minute we start, even before grade school, but especially when we get into grade school, what the hell is intuition? Nobody's talking about that. That's going with trusting yourself, and school is the opposite of that. School says, I will tell you what is valid. I will tell you what is something you can trust to move forward on. And then we go through that, and then we spend our adult lives trying to do this reclaiming work, this reclamation work. And then it becomes really hard. So it's like feeling like an outsider is one thing, but also having no practice in recognizing intuition, or even much less placing value on it. So we start there, backing up to say, okay, if we were to reimagine what childhood would look like in terms of learning and facilitating space for one to grow into themselves. Chinua Achebe, one of my favorite authors, says, no one can teach me to be myself. And in that space, so when we talk about these things like intuition and reimagining what education and learning might look like, I feel like that's one of the most integral places and one of the richest spaces for us to start. What does it mean for me to hear and acknowledge what is happening in my belly, and much less to honor it?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is the initial name for my vision that I told you I started writing in 2012. When I started writing it, I called it Learn You.
Aha.
Learn You. Like that was literally the name of the space. It was Learn You. Learn Y-O-U.
Yeah.
Just because of everything you just said. That's the reason
totally.
why.
Totally. Because how, it's unfortunate. I can't stand that, even though my handle a lot online is radical selfie. That didn't come from, I think like that connotation of radical meaning shifting. It was really about radical self-expression work that I'd been doing with a whole lot of women about understanding themselves. This idea of like, if I were to understand the design of me and to start to build a level of trust around that design, what might my life look like? How do I want to feel? And what am I doing that's in alignment with that or separate from that? Learning myself, my meanness, as I call it all the time, and making space for other people to honor their meanness too, backing up from the labels and actually learning the person. And then also allowing people to self-identify. That's one of the things too. Man, Scott, we need like 15 more conversations because right away, when I say the labels, I know one of the things that I'm really interested in when we talk about the labels and identification, I think we may come from different spaces, even when we talk about like social constructs. Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, even with the idea of like blackness and this idea of race, those things being social constructs. And for you coming from a space of it where it's like, we need to go away from those labels, and me coming from a space of, I'm going to identify as what makes sense for me. And yes, those things might be social constructs in that sense, but my meanness defines a big part of my blackness, and my understanding of my blackness is very much tied to me in a way that I find very empowering, despite what society is telling me it should or shouldn't be. And so those are, but for me, that's an intuitive thing. And so because I practice being in touch with my intuition, then I don't feel like, inherently because Scott is in a different space with that, then we can't connect, because I don't need you to be what I am or how I am in order to see obvious connections, obvious potential work that can be done in the space. And to me, that's also a part of falling victim to the system and not necessarily looking at systems thinking in terms of saying, okay, the issue here is the system. What can we do about that?
Absolutely. And I appreciate that. And, my work in race relations, as you referenced a little bit at the beginning, is something else that I do through a platform called Race Haven. And, I'm also, with you saying that in terms of the differences in the way we view the current social constructs around race, the reality is for me, everything that you have heard me state, if when you've listened to certain podcasts, I've literally learned and grown into those positions the same way I've learned and grown into embracing unschooling and self-directed learning. If you would have met me prior to 2014, when I started Race Haven as a Facebook group, I didn't know and learn the things I know and learned. I've known and learned over the last, 2.5 years to bring me to the point where I am now, where I choose to reject the social construct of race. I choose to focus on ethnicity and embrace ethnicity, because very briefly, just because the social construct of race was born out of white supremacy.
Yes.
And, I reject white supremacy, and I see myself as doing the work to eradicate, white supremacy. So within that, I'm trying to stop using some of the tools of white supremacy. And one of the tools of white supremacy is even the concept that there's white people and black people in this world, and the reality is, I tell my kids all the time, I've never seen a white person in my life. I've never seen a person of color of paper. I've just never seen that. But beyond that, again, I've done research on, anyone who's interested, if you just simply do a Wikipedia search of white people and just read it, it'll talk about scientific racism and how these, they call them pseudoscientists in the 1700s, came up with the whole concept of Caucasoid Caucasians and Negroids and
really interesting research. Yes.
All of that stuff. And that's kind of why I've decided to go, in that direction as just one of the small things that I can do. So I just refer to, people of European descent as European Americans. And if I know they're Italian, I'll say Italian American. But before that, I'll just say their name. And for African people, most of the time you'll hear me just say African people, or African Americans who are descendant of enslaved Africans. If I need to drill down like that, and if I know further, Jamaican, or et cetera, I'll use those terms.
Yeah.
And that's just, that's the reason why.
Which is great. And I think it's important that we sort of share those perspectives as well, in terms of not us both having the same perspective, but sharing it out loud, because this is a part of how we grow. This is what's so beautiful for me about the unschooling journey, that it is so liberatory in the way that I think that you talk about meeting me prior to 2014 or 15. I don't think I would be able to I think I would have been stuck there being like, what? He don't see black people as black people? Bah. That's where my mind would have been. But now, looking past the space and still being able to completely say, okay, cool. That's where you are with it. I can totally appreciate that. I love that you're bringing up the research, because I've done a lot of that research as well. And all of that brings me back to a space where it's like, nah, nothing is outside of my blackness for me. And I don't subscribe to the idea of, because they did these things and they called it that, then I separate that from who and how I am, because the history of it, the culture, the cultural aspects of it. And I'm not African American, but as an African of the diaspora, I connect with, with people, whether they come from the African diaspora or not. But none of those things make me feel like I need to separate or define myself outside of my idea of blackness. And I think it's beautiful that we can have this conversation, particularly as a black male, and a black woman, because that's a whole nother conversation too, that in a lot of these spaces where a lot of the things that I identify with as an intersectional feminist, all of these things that feel for a lot of folks of color contrary, right, to this idea of like upliftment and building and expansion and growth and all of the things that we believe in for all humans, where it's like, nah, you need to start talking to people more. Get out your head and start talking to people more, because you'll start to recognize that no matter where those spaces are, there's a lot of things that are just common to humans, and also that I don't need you to be who and how I am or think like I think in order for us to make a connection.
Agree. And I believe in dialogue. And again, that's just another skill that was introduced to me through systems thinking. Yeah. And it's a totally different way of communicating. Most people, in my experience, most people who grew up like I grew up and indoctrinated in the ways I was indoctrinated, we tend to think in having competing values. It's either my way or your way. One way is right. The other way is wrong. It's all about competition. It's all about, right and wrong. Whereas I no longer see the world that way. I believe that there's just an array, a spectrum of truths, and answers and realities and et cetera. And that, again, that's something that crosses over several different, conversations in terms of like just the various spectrum of what it means, to live this life in humanity.
Yes.
But for me, I can listen to everything you just said and it makes 100%, sense to me, and I respect it and I embrace it. I don't feel like it threatens my beliefs.
Exactly.
And I feel like a lot of times when I speak, people, they hear me as saying the way you're thinking is wrong. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm just sharing with people how I've grown and what I've adopted. But I'm not saying that anyone has to adopt, what I adopt. But I do believe all I ask is that you consider it, and that I be heard. And if you choose to listen to me,
exactly. And even understanding listening is a skill. I love that you say all the time, Scott, that like the idea of dialogue versus debate. I think that's a really powerful thing that we really need to start thinking about, because it does come from that very schooly idea of competition, competitiveness, like, nah, I'm right and you're wrong. So like that sort of idea of saying, no, what if it wasn't this idea of one ultimate truth, or like, boom, I win and you lose? What if we both walked away with new information, new perspective that may or may not alter the way that what our end game is, but it may certainly shift. Hopefully it will shift the way that we interact with each other in a way that is positive.
Exactly.
And if that's possible, what the hell? Why would I not want to be in a space where I can practice that skill? These are life skills that we don't get to practice enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
Yeah. So you gave that beautiful Donella Meadows, was it, quote?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's two awesome resources that I love to share with people. One is that it's one that I just started engaging with. And ironically, it's called The Unschool. That's the most amazing thing to me, that it's called The Unschool. So literally, it's like the unschool.co. If you Google The Unschool, you'll find it. And if you go to Facebook and go to The Unschool, you'll find it there as well. But there's this wonderful woman who teaches basically disrupting social systems by design. And another website she has is like disruptdesign.co. But it speaks to how literally everything, again, here we go with social constructs, everything that we engage with that was that's in our reality, that was designed, that wasn't a form of nature and is not by nature. It was designed by man. Mm-hmm. And if man designed it, that means man and woman can redesign it or recreate it or create something new from scratch. Yeah. And that's what the Unschool is all about. It's about teaching those mental models, those frameworks. There's so many different ways you can engage with that platform. When you go to it, anyone who's like-minded, if this podcast is resonating with you, I think that you will enjoy what you'll find at the Unschool. I'm currently taking the systems thinking course myself, the online self-paced course in systems thinking. And there's so many other good ones. And then the other one is watersfoundation.org, WATERS foundation.org.
Great. And this will be on the show notes page, y'all, which is going to be AkilaSRichards.com/Scott, SCOTT, real easy. So I'll make sure that these links are there as well.
The cool thing about the Systems Thinking and Education website is that it allows you to interact with system thinking from the educational framework only, because systems thinking, it goes across several areas, several different areas and social areas, social, environmental, et cetera, that people are using these tools and this language to solve problems. Well, the specific website that I just gave you, watersfoundation.org, addresses it from an educational standpoint only.
Great. Thank you. So why does systems thinking resonate with you as the Edupreneur? Give us some context.
It resonates with me because systems thinking is about honoring the whole. Systems thinking is about honoring the fact that we are all interconnected, and that we are all interconnected and we all impact each other in some form or fashion because of our interconnectedness. And we live in a world that is very fragmented in terms of the way that we solve problems. We currently solve problems, and all of our current systems have been designed in a very fragmented way and in silos. If you look at a community, you'll have schools, you'll have hospitals, you'll have the police force, you'll have government, et cetera. In this community, you'll have food, supermarkets, et cetera, and they all operate as if they are individual entities. They all make decisions without thinking about the feedback loops and how they may impact the other entities within that system.
Yes.
That's the fragmented way that we have evolved as humans, and it's the way that we solve problems. And because you're only focusing on solving problems within your individual silo, what happens is and I'm speaking very generally, I'm making a lot of generalizations, and I hope everyone's okay with that.
Okay.
What ends up happening is there's negative side effects that if you make a decision in the school and you're only thinking about how this decision is going to impact my school without thinking about the hospitals or the small businesses, the community at large, how they may be impacted by your decision, then that's where you get dysfunction. And I'll give an example. Let's just say, I'll give you one great example of this dysfunction. Schools let out at 3:00.
Mm-hmm.
When do most parents get off work?
Thank you. 5:00. And by the time they hit traffic, especially if you're in Atlanta, shot, it's like 7:00 by the time you get home. Yeah.
So what ends up happening is now you have the dysfunction of parents having to go, do all these extra human things like A, pay for someone to watch their kids after school.
Yep.
B, have their kids at home alone when that maybe is not the best thing. Just all these other things, or teachers having to stay later, et cetera, et cetera. Just all these discomforts that we've grown to think are normal, right?
Right.
But it's really what's the most valuable thing for children and communities and families is actually parents are actually there to engage and spend more time with their kids.
Exactly.
But our society, it's not built that way. So the dysfunction, that's dysfunction. But here's what a systems thinking solution or, way of viewing this would be. It would say, okay, we have the family structure. How can we, make decisions as a local business and as a school to make sure that our interests align? So maybe parents have to get out of work, earlier, because their kids are getting out of school earlier. And, so we don't want to keep parents, at work all day long, and they have to then spend extra money and be over, worked and underpaid and all these various dysfunctions that we've, again, grown used to. Those things would be solved if we took a systems approach to thinking about the whole. Same, like, and the other thing I'll say, and I hope this is making sense.
It definitely is. I'm trying really hard not to butt in and be like, yo, because it's absolutely making sense, Scott. And right away, what comes up for me is even backing up to say, when you talk about thinking of the individuals and the communities and the disconnect, even in school, before we even get to the connection of the hospital and the supermarket and all of this, even in school, mathematics is happening from this time to this time. Language arts is happening from this time to this time. And 3/4 of the time, you're not even considering the child who's in it and whether they want to be there. So what, all of those are, the intergenerational disconnect, because it's not just mom and dad and parents. It's grandma, it's uncle, it's the teenagers who could be with the 9-year-old and the 90-year-old who could be with the 22-year-old. All of these things that are segmented by design that, as you say, we've normalized them, but they're far from freaking normal or natural or even helpful. So yes, Scott, it's making perfect sense.
Good. I don't have to say anything else. You just nailed it because you gave that example. That's just another example. Yeah. So systems thinking is the opposite of that. Systems thinking is about just honoring those relationships, honoring a healthy whole. And the other example that I was going to get into is medicine, but I think I'm sure people who are listening starting to make those connections between traditional medicine versus holistic medicine.
Yeah.
And, that's what systems thinking is. So when I learned about systems thinking, it just made all the sense in the world because of the things that you just said. And it's about honoring, the whole and making sure that you're making decisions that, aren't going to cause negative side effects like, those drug commercials, all those wonderful things that it does, but then a long list of the negative side effects.
Right. Yeah. So Scott, what's happening with you as you are just constantly learning about systems thinking and, as you said, just kind of evolving your thought processes with this knowledge and the application of it by connecting with other folks? Tell us some of the things that you're doing about that now. Tell us a little bit about like Grow and all of these spaces where you're actually starting to apply and really dive into solutions for these issues.
My struggle, and so here's and I guess it kind of ties into Grow. I feel like, yes, I'm doing stuff, but when I tell you that I am so conflicted because I want to do more and I want to do more intentionally and more in a more focused way. But I have to go make money.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And that gets in the way of making a difference for me. And that frustrates me to no end. And I'm constantly battling and struggling with that. So while I have all these amazing ideas and I listen to all these books and read all these books and, and I actually do a lot. I do a lot.
Right. I was going to say, please don't discount that because you are doing a lot. Yeah.
I appreciate that. But you know what? In my mind, I'm like, I'm not doing enough. It's not enough.
Yeah.
So And the reason is because I have bills.
Yep.
And I fell into this trap of capitalism without being aware. And so I took on all this debt called school loans and
Yep.
debt called a house mortgage. Children and my kids currently go to a Montessori school, but that's about to end. But with all that being said, I have all these expenses. My wife and I, we have all these expenses. So to make money, I'm a real estate agent.
Yeah.
And I also drive Uber to fill in the gaps. And I've come up against this wall where I don't have enough financial security or financial freedom where I can just drop everything and totally pursue grow, which I'm going to explain in a second, and totally pursue grow. And some of the other visions that I have in terms of systems design and making a difference. But I believe these things will all happen in time. And I'm practicing patience, and I've always been impatient. But with all that being said, I just wish I could get to it in a more, focused manner. I wish I had all the, the funding and all the, the backing, or I had my own financial freedom.
And thank you for saying that too. You are right that I absolutely appreciate you bringing that up too. That's something that I get constantly from people, again, with the idea of like the luxury, quote unquote, of unschooling and feeling like, well, I would love to, but I have these bills. I would love to, but these things. And I stopped at undergrad, but I still had a shit ton of debt because I went from Florida to Georgia. So I was paying out of state fees. Didn't know anything also about like credit cards. So when I got credit cards freshman year, I was like, took them on and didn't understand what that actually meant. Now we have children, Chris and I. And so I hear you. And it is really important that we address that sort of thing too, to say, one, we don't have the solutions. People have to look at what makes sense for them. So you're doing Uber. As I told you when we talked before, I was a real estate agent for a long time as well. Did property management on the side, took on writing projects that I didn't exactly love, all of these things. And for us, just to bring this up here, one of the things that I did in realizing that, okay, I wasn't clear on how I could make more money so that I could focus more on doing this work and really providing liberatory work for people who want to get their kids out of one system without replacing that master for another, is that we had to shed a lot of shit. So we gave up our house completely. We weren't even able to sell it. Like we had to walk away from the house completely because we realized, oh my God, the majority of our income was going into this house to get to be in the good public education system, as you mentioned before. The fallacy of that. We moved into this big house in Gwinnett County because on paper we could afford it, and doing all of these things and had a couple of vehicles and all of these things. And we realized, if we actually want to put liberation into practice and inside the current system, we can't figure out how to increase income, then we have to decrease expenses. And then we sold one vehicle and gave one away. So, and then, started using home share stuff as we do now, like Airbnb, which costs a lot less than having the mortgage every month and paying the electricity bill and all of those things. So you got to design, you have to be willing to look at what a system might look like for you that is in alignment with, how you want to feel and what you want to do. So I'm very glad that you brought that up.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. My pleasure. So, but with all that being said, I think some of those things that I just shared is probably the reason why I designed Grow the way that I designed it. Grow is what I like to call a personal and professional growth incubator. And, we believe in incubating, young people, not educating them. And the key concept behind Grow, and again, it totally evolved as time has gone on. I've gone more and more towards the unschooling realm than I was when I started the process. But I was always in that alternative space, and that's why my kids are in Montessori schools. When I was teaching in public school, I realized that I would never put my kids in one. And also, I'm a product. Let me just say that too. I'm a product of public schools, inner city. I'm born and raised in West Philly, so please understand. Like I lived it, and like you said at the beginning of the show, my whole family. A lot of family members were public school educators. But with that being said, I realized after looking behind that curtain as a teacher that I wasn't going to put my kids in that space. So when I began to design Grow, basically the long and short of it is creating a space combining, again, you mentioned this as well, the whole fragmentation of putting adults somewhere different from young people. Well, we want to bring adults and young people together. So basically what we're trying to do is we're going to combine co-working space, adult co-working space in the same space as our children and our learners, what I like to call learners.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you can visualize, all of our listeners, you can visualize, just say it's a 2-story building. It may not be when we get one, but let's just say a 2-story building. It's easy to visualize, where you would have adult coworkers, who are either, freelancers, work from home entrepreneurs, or, work from home professionals, or small business owners who will purchase space, office space or co-working space. So there'll be some dedicated office space as well as just open co-working space, like your Starbucks type environment.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have a little coffee, and tea station, et cetera. And, there'll be different levels of membership where if you just wanted to have a seat, an open co-working space seat, there'll be one level of membership. And then if you had an office, obviously you would pay a little bit more for that. But what we want to do is we want to bring these adults into space who are not only want to work in our space, but hopefully will also want to give some time. And what we envision is that the adults who come into our space will be like-minded, who will want to come into the space to give back to their community like never before.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, you can give back to your community in several different ways. One is just by simply modeling professionalism. Literally showing up is making a difference, because these kids are now seeing, how you move in the world. And,
yes.
and it brings about questions and curiosities about what you're doing and what you're working on.
Yes, they're not sitting behind the wall of a school.
Your job is.
Yes, separate from real life. They're seeing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then the other opportunity for our adults, and we view these as all opportunities, we call them ecosystem growth and engagement opportunities. So one, you get to model professionalism. The next thing you get to do is you get to bring your passion and share your passion. Whatever it is you're passionate about, we are going to match passion with passion. If a young person is interested in what you're passionate about, they can schedule with you for a workshop, a class, or whatever. You can come down and do a class or a workshop. That's the second thing. And then the other thing is you can just be a mentor. You may just want to take a young person under your wing to mentor them, and then provide internships for young people where they can come up and work with you and shadow you. And then I'm sorry, I keep saying the final thing, but then there's another thing. And then obviously opening up your professional Rolodex, to our young people in the space. As you get to know them and build relationships,
yes.
You may realize that, I have a friend that, works over here, or has a business over here, or, has access to this over here. And it aligns with the passion and interest of this young person in the space. That, just from the adult standpoint, and what these adults with these various passions, these various interests, and these various, skill sets and jobs and businesses, that alone opens up a world of possibilities for the young people in the space. And
also for the adults in the space, Scott, because as you're saying that, and I'm envisioning that also the other way around, young people also know other people. They know people globally. So you might be working on this business here. You might have a tea company, right? Because I know, just add honey, that yes. they might have some friends in somewhere in Asia that happen to have parents or an uncle or whoever who has this particular
yes.
blend that you would never know about. But because they're in an anime club together, then you now have that connection there. So it works. Again, it's an ecosystem. So it's going to work
Absolutely.
In all of these different ways. Yeah, we can't even imagine. Yes, naturally.
It's just going to organically, what you're saying, it's just naturally and organically, it's just all that goodness.
Yep.
It's just going to be inherent within this model, within this system.
Exciting.
So all that is inherent. And the other vision of mine, is because I believe in destroying systems, is that, so we all can imagine what the young people will be doing, right? It's just literally, following their passion and pursuing, we're just there to incubate, provide resources and help when needed.
Yep.
We'll have, and I won't get into the details. There's other details. I'll just kind of leave it there. I think, everyone listening can kind of envision this space.
Yeah.
But there will be, some dedicated adults who are with the young people, especially the young people who may need, who will need some guidance, some supervision, in the space. But the older, learners, they're kind of there and taking advantage of all the opportunities that are there, in the best way that they see fit, using the resources, et cetera.
Yeah.
But beyond that, my vision is that I want this to be something that can be in every community across the country and eventually across the globe.
No, exactly.
Because what I envision is that I want to destroy, again, systems, social constructs of socioeconomic social systems that divide us along those economic lines. So, for example, for those, I'll use Atlanta because I know you're familiar with Atlanta.
Yeah.
So if we have, let's say grow Vine City, which is one of the poorer sections of inner city Atlanta. And then we had Grow, let's call it Buckhead. What I envision is that this is a very fluid ecosystem where learners can go in between, different locations and, build those relationships with the adults in the spaces as well as the young people in the spaces. And there may be, an adult in Vine, Grow Vine City that may be giving a workshop or maybe specialize in dance. So dance happens at Grow Vine City, but there may be an adult or some young people, in Grow Buckhead that they're building projects around computer science and coding, et cetera.
Yes.
So learners in Vine City may take a Uber up to, Buckhead, several days a week and vice versa.
Yes.
To engage, build those relationships, et cetera. And then ultimately just having this big ecosystem where everyone's getting to know everyone through conferences and just being intentional. Put it like this. We're going to be intentional about forming those alliances and building those relationships across socioeconomic and ethnic lines so that we can destroy these social constructs. I want to destroy them, and I believe that Grow can be a catalyst for that. One of the non-negotiables and one of the reasons why Grow isn't starting tomorrow is because I refuse to charge $500 to $5,000 a month for tuition. It was one of those things that we grappled with big time going through the school starter course. And it's one of those things that many of the free schools out there, the democratic schools and the Sudbury schools, et cetera, they all charge, a significant tuition.
Yeah.
And even some that are on a sliding scale, there's still some people who are paying, 20, 30,000 a year, et cetera. And as a part of disrupting systems and models, and one of the things that I truly believe, and one of the things that I grappled with and my team and I grappled with and ultimately decided that I just couldn't sleep at night charging, even saying, well, the people who can afford it will pay and then the people who can't won't, and it'll balance each other out. I refuse to do that. And that plays into the socioeconomic, systems and structures that I feel like, again, divide us and keep us, trapped. Grow, when we open the doors, another benefit of the adult coworkers being in the space is that will help offset the cost of being in a space. And that's one thing. And then the other thing is, our tuition is literally going to be $50 a month. Our membership is going to be $50 a month because, I wanted it to be something that could be obtainable for anyone. Anyone. And I feel like, and I know that even that may be a stretch for some families who are, in certain situations.
Yeah, but it increases access significantly, especially in comparison to what's out there. And access is such a primary part of one of the things that separate us. Yes.
Absolutely. I do not want this to be something that is only for, certain families. I want it to be something for everyone. So that's one of the problems that we have to solve. And I told my team, and I'll finish with this, I'd rather not do it if everyone can't take part. And I'll leave it at that.
Come on, y'all. I go to grow.com. So y'all see now, like that was the main reason that I wanted to have Scott on here, because when we were talking about Grow and when you initially reached out and I looked at the meetup group that you had and just seeing what Grow was about and then talking to you about it, I was and am so very excited about that model being because I definitely see it being global. And there are already a lot of people across the world who are already thinking in that way. Nothing's new under the sun, right? And are already doing it.
I know that.
Yeah. And who are already doing it and may not even know that there's a Scott Speed and crew who are working on this thing right here. So Scott, if we're hearing this and we're like, okay, I want to be a part of this. I'm not even in Atlanta. I may not even be in the US because we have listeners all over the globe. How do we support it? What can we do?
In order to get this started, we have to recruit. In order to get a space, we would have to have the financing to be able to rent a space. So we figured that our first step would be having to attract the adults who are willing to pay the membership to be in a space. That's the first step. Then we would be able to move to the next levels and also having to raise the money to, supply the space and the way we would, the way we want to. And we're going to start small, but, these are the things that are in front of us. So, something else that's aside, right around, 2014, I also started this mobile app project. That's, a baby of mine that is about to launch, and the energy and time that I have to put into getting that off the ground, it wouldn't allow me to have the energy and time that I would have to do to raise the money and to continue to do the recruiting of the adults for growth. So it was almost like, okay, we got to this point where we went through the course and we built out this framework. We know what we want it to be. But now what do we do with respect to the fact that I am also the CEO of this mobile app company and I have to push that because there's a lot of money and time invested in that. And it's that conflict. And I'm just being honest. And I hope the listeners and you can appreciate and don't mind this conflict.
But it's not a conflict. It's all a part of the process. And it's good that you're letting us know what that whole thing. Yeah. So the first thing I hear you saying is that you need a space, because if somebody offers you a space, then the funding for the space is a non-issue. So you need the resources to be able to have this space. That's the first thing. So in terms of contacting you or, is there like a newsletter? What can we be a part of to stay apprised of what's going on in case somebody has this person who's saying, yes, I have this building here and I would love to be able to let that out to you for $300 a month because all I need is to be able to pay such and such. How do we do that?
I go to grow.com. Yeah. And that'll take you to our meetup page. You can register there and also, contact me through there. Definitely. And if anyone is listening to this and you feel like, we can help, I can help, or I want to be a part of this, it'll probably literally start out of my house. I'll start posting stuff that I can meet up in a couple of months here when my children finish up school, because I'm going to start homeschooling them, unschooling them starting this summer. And one of the things that I talked about doing with one of my partners in this venture is just she and I starting with our children and just kind of meeting out of my house or at the library, etc. And just trying to build community around the concept. So if we may not have the resources to get into a space and we don't have all the business people lined up, etc., just yet, we can start, trying to attract the families, here I live in South Fulton County, right outside Atlanta. So anyone in that space, the Union City, Fairburn, Fayetteville, Riverdale, College Park, area, is where I am. And that's where we're looking to kick off. And, so anyone in that area, or if you know someone in the area who this kind of resonates with, we may be starting in a library near you, just getting together with like-minded families and parents who may be, entrepreneurs or stay-at-home parents or whatever that can engage with us, kind of get this thing off the ground. We're looking for you.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I'm so excited about what you're doing, Scott, and so very appreciative of your voice in the space. I want y'all to really check out the show notes page because it's going to have a lot of information for your own personal development, for community development as well. It's such a rich space that I think we just curated right here, Scott. So thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm definitely going to be bothering Scott again to be back on the podcast because there's so many wonderful things we could talk about. Plus, once growth starts to build, I really want to be a part of sharing what that process is looking like as well and what the needs are. And also having just really honest dialogue about the challenges to doing this work, because it can feel very rah-rah. And then when you get into the thick of things, then, the money issue comes up, all of the logistics, just dealing with people because we're not really good at, we don't have a lot of practice because we come from a schooly space, most of us, of even just dealing with the dynamics of people and personal management in that space. We need to be talking about those sort of things too, because all of that is a part of growing ourselves and growing our communities and reconnecting ourselves. So thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I appreciate you. And I look forward to future conversations.
Thanks for listening to Fair of the Free Child podcast. Like the show? Then show your love or give your feedback at akilasrichards.com.